Humanity Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Richard Acritelli. This is a podcast. It's a production of the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. On today's episode of the Fog War and Humanity here on HMTV, my special guest is Leah Freeberg. She will be talking about her father, who fought during the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, in one of the coldest and largest battles that this country's ever fought, especially in Europe during World War II itself. Her dad was a prisoner of war, and we'll be talking about his experience in terms of combat, being a prisoner, and then coming home. Leah, thank you very much for coming down here today. We appreciate it. Thank you, very much for your time when looking at this extremely, important story of sacrifice and service to our country. Now, before we get into your dad, let's just go over maybe a couple of brief things about yourself. Where did you grow up as a kid?
Well, thank you very much, Richard, for having me here. It's a pleasure and an honor, actually. My sister and I grew up in West Hempstead in Nassau County. We moved from Brooklyn when we were very little. We went to the John Street School in Franklin Square and then H. Frank Harry High School for high school. We both went on to Adelphi University. I was in the School of Business Administration as an undergrad and a grad student, and my sister was in the School of Nursing. So we're truly Long Islanders.
Okay. Where did your family move out from in Brooklyn?
We moved out of Flatbush. We were very young. I think I was 4, my sister was 2. So we don't really remember that much of it. We really made our home on Long Island.
Okay. All right. I know West Hempstead a little bit. I drove a truck for Sears, Sports Authority, Modell's, and delivered mattresses. And I remember, what was that, Nassau Boulevard?
Yes.
Up by, was that Cherry Road?
Cherry Valley.
Yeah. And Hempstead Turnpike and stuff like that. So I know there's some really, really good communities over there. Now, what is your profession?
Right now, I am a 4th grade math instructor at the Hebrew Academy of Nassau County. I retired from a very interesting 30-year career. I was with L'Oreal USA for 30 years. And after that, I pivoted a bit, formed my own business, which I'm still working on. And then I was very fortunate to have been offered a position as a 4th grade math teacher.
Wow.
And I'm really enjoying doing that now.
What is L'Oreal there? What is that?
L'Oreal is a global cosmetics and fragrance organization. Yes.
Okay. Were they based out of Long Island here?
No. They are an international company. They do have a main headquarters in New York City, but they do not have an office in Long Island.
And what was one of the jobs you did for them there?
When I left the organization, I was the assistant vice president of sales operations for their multicultural beauty division. My areas of specialty were operations, finance, and budgeting. I did a lot of analysis, forecasting, worked tremendously with numbers, and that's one of the reasons why I was able to transition into the role that I have now as a math teacher.
Wow. So you're pretty sharp, right? You had a big job.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
It was a very interesting and exciting time. I learned a lot. I had a lot of on-the-job training. I met a lot of interesting people. And, of course, the skills that I acquired, I was able to transition into what I'm doing now. So it's been a very good ride all the way around.
Okay. Now let's get back to your dad. You're growing up. You're growing up in Brooklyn. You come out here to Nassau County, okay, which I guess like the suburbs, that sort of thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What was the job that your father had done to provide for his family?
He was a salesperson and later a manager for several companies that were involved with chemicals that were involved with making plastics. In the later part of his career, he did a lot of traveling internationally to see various agents and other offices around the world. And towards the end of his life, it was very fortunate that he was able to take my mom with him. They did a lot of traveling together. They did a lot of traveling in the Far East. He traveled to Japan a lot, and he He circled the globe pretty extensively, I have to say, in probably the last 10 years of his career there.
And very active, huh?
Yes, he was. He unfortunately passed away at the age of 64. He was still working at the time and planning to retire just several months after that, but unfortunately he never made it to that point.
Okay. Now, your dad's a World War II veteran?
Yes, he was.
Now, where does your dad grow up?
He grew up in Brooklyn, and that's where he lived pretty much for his entire life. He lived in the same house that we used to visit my grandmother in Flatbush, and we used to visit her there all the time. So he and his brother and sister grew up in Brooklyn.
My grandfather was from Manhattan Beach and Sheepshead Bay.
Okay, that wasn't far.
Yeah, and my Uncle Sherman, they learned their horsemanship by pulling Army artillery pieces in Flatbush there.
Wow, that's where they grew up. It was Flatbush.
Yeah, and it seems like the world was like from New York City at one time or another, especially from out here, right? Because everybody kind of moves eastward, you know.
I believe that they were members of the Flatbush Jewish Center at one point.
Okay. Now, your dad goes to school in Flatbush, right?
Yes, I believe so.
And then when does he go into the service?
My father was born in 1925. So he was in the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. I believe that he was first in the service in 1943. But when he was captured during the Battle of the Bulge, he was 19 years old. And I think that was part of the whole story behind the Battle of the Bulge. The infantry group, the 423 that they sent there, they called them the Green Troops. I mean, these were very, very young guys.
So, like, when you look at Pearl Harbor, he's only 16 years old, Pearl Harbor.
Yes.
So they know the war isn't going away. You're 16 years old. Hitler, we're fighting in North Africa at that time in 1942, and we're down in the Solomon Islands. There was a lot of fighting to be done. So I'm sure your father always in the back of his mind said, sooner or later, I'm going to be in uniform. And so now he graduates from Flatbush, or does he leave school early?
That I honestly don't know. I think that he may have even, no, he wouldn't have been able to have started work. He would have been too young. I don't know if he went on to college and maybe completed a year or two. That we never really talked about.
Okay.
But again, being 19, if he even would have been in college, he certainly would not have graduated.
Sure.
I think that he finished high school.
Yeah.
I just don't know how far along he got in his post high school education.
Did he have any brothers or sisters or anything like that?
Yes, he was the middle of three children. He had an older brother and a younger sister.
Was the brother in the service also?
The brother, I believe, was. I think that my uncle was very accomplished in several languages. After my father went missing, because my grandmother had literally received a notice that my father was missing, he was instructed to go and find him. It
was like a Western Union, right? Telegram, maybe?
I believe that my grandmother had received, I'm not sure if it was a telegram, but she had received a notification that he was missing in action, and my uncle went to find him.
Wow. And he was already overseas?
I think at that point he may have actually been in a hospital post-service.
Wow. Okay. So now, do you know where your dad, where does he sign up? Do you know any of that? Or?
I think he signed up at Fort Breckenridge, I believe. And then at one point they were obviously shipped out. They ended up in Le Havre in France.
Okay, yeah, major shipping.
Yes, and then they went to Belgium and to Germany.
Okay. Now, do you know when your father lands in France by any chance?
I have actually a document that probably would tell me that, so I can take a look and tell you.
Yeah, sure.
One of the interesting things about uncovering all of this is that I have all of the original documentation and paperwork from my father, and he kept very meticulous records, and one of them were all of the places that he had been during his entire military service.
If you don't mind?
Yes.
All right, so he's got here. All right, so he enlisted at Grand Central Palace November 23rd, 1943. Fort Dix, which looks like that's probably maybe an introduction or a transit center, from 43, right after Christmas time, to January 6, 1944. Fort Benning, Georgia, January 8th to March 28th. So that's probably his basic. And that Benning was a big armor, infantry. That place was just hopping at that time. Camp Atterbury, IND. That's got to be Indiana, maybe, right? IND. But that's just something that's really in the interior of the country. So March 29th to October 9th. Camp Miles, Standish, Massachusetts. So he could have shipped out of Massachusetts. So October 10th, 16th. Queen Elizabeth, right? So he's on a British ship. October 26th to November 30th. So he's on, that poor guy's on the ship there for about over a month, right? So Le Havre. So he is landing in France at the time that Eisenhower's Broad Front is just about getting into Germany at that time there. And the problem is when he lands and he's going towards the front lines, the more experienced soldiers are getting pulled back.
Yes.
And
they were supposed to relieve them. They were supposed to relieve the 2nd Battalion, I believe.
Yeah. And and those guys didn't even have cold weather clothing or anything along those lines. And supplies were low. Supply lines were very long.
From when my husband and I took the tour into Germany and Belgium, our tour guide told us that they actually had arrived ahead of the supplies. And not only did they not have the right clothing, but the bigger issue was the footwear that they had.
Yeah.
Considering how freezing and cold it was, they all developed trench foot, which was what my father developed also. His feet were tremendously discolored, and through his entire life.
Did he have anything amputated or?
No, thank goodness no, but his circulation was severely compromised for his entire life because of it. His feet were extremely discolored and always bothered him, and it was a result of that.
That's the irony of it, right? You're out in this terrible weather, it's snowing, it's brutally cold, and your feet are still sweating, you know, and you have the inability to protect your own feet. And this is something that was a major, major problem for the soldiers on those front lines there, you know. And this is one of the worst winters of recorded history, too.
Well, the other thing, too, is they didn't have anything to change into.
Yeah.
So they were constantly in wet, freezing cold clothes.
So then he's Lindenbach, France. That probably sounds like it's a little bit closer to Germany. So December 3rd to December 10th. Black Forest, Germany, December 11th to December 13th. The Siegfried Line, December 13th to December 18th. Schönberg, Germany, December 8th. So he's all the way in the front of the lines there.
Well,
he's as far as you could almost go.
He was not only in the front of the lines, but he had to be in the front line because, as I have some of my other paperwork, he was a radio operator and learned the Morse code. So the radio operators had to stay with their commanders. They had to be relaying all these messages. So he was carrying this 40-pound radio on his back, but he had to be in the front so that he could do all of the communication.
And then, let's see, captured December 19th, 1944 at Schönberg, Germany.
Yes.
And then Gerolstein, Germany. Now, at this point here, what you're going to see with the prisoners of war is that now you're going to have more land forces, infantry, armor, logistics, right? Radio men that are going to be taken than what was shot down from the air crews. And that goes to show you the amount of losses from the Battle of the Bulge. Even though we win the battle, there was a lot of losses early on, you know? And your dad was really, as the Bulge was going in towards German lines there, right? As they were penetrating in German lines, your dad was out front. He
Right.
was, he was like walking point in the front of this whole broad front campaign from, the English Channel down to the Swiss border. It's amazing.
Well, the part that was so revealing and so just unbelievable was when my husband and I were there in 2019, and we actually were in Schönberg. We have pictures exactly of where they were captured.
Wow.
And we have all the pictures, including the route that they took, because when they were first commissioned into the Belgian-German border, they were at the Siegfried Line because they were supposed to be relieving the 2nd Infantry. And we had seen the pictures of those triangular-shaped dragon teeth that were supposedly lining the Siegfried Line all the way from Germany all the way north. And then they were somehow commissioned to move back.
Did you walk through there, the Siegfried Line there?
We didn't walk through the Siegfried Line, but we were in the forest where we saw all of those dragon teeth, those big triangular cement blocks. Pretty. I don't want to say impressive, but I can only imagine what they must have been like. And also, the Siegfried Line had those bunkers, where the Germans were also able to hide. But by the time the 423rd had reached the Siegfried Line, from what I understand, they were there because it was supposedly a ghost area. There was nothing going on there for several days.
That's the key word. Is it was so quiet.
Yes, and
right?
that's one of the reasons that they brought these troops there, because since they were so green, they figured nothing much would happen to them. And all of a sudden, the Germans were then encircling them from the north and the south. And then they were supposedly asked to move back to Schönberg. By that time, the Germans were pretty much encircling them. And when they were in Schönberg, they had no choice but to surrender. From what I had read, over 7,000 soldiers were captured on that day, and they were then marching from the Siegfried Line to Schönberg, which was about, I'd say, at least 15 miles. And then once they were captured in Schönberg, they had a march from Schönberg to Gerolstein, where they were going to be loaded onto a train and taken to Mühlberg. The distance from Schönberg to Gerolstein is at least 25 miles. And these guys were marching this in the freezing cold in the middle of winter. They were packed onto cattle cars. Just in the same way that the Jews who were packed onto the cattle cars who were taken to the death camps, they were packed onto cattle cars and they were going to a prisoner of war camp.
Sure.
And from what I understand, that was one of the most deplorable condition prisoner of war camps around. It was supposedly huge. Now, when my father was captured, his family told me after he passed away that the first thing he did was he ripped off his dog tags and threw them into the snow.
They say Hebrew on it?
Yes, because he didn't want that to be known to the Germans, because they were trying to isolate the Jewish prisoners from the non-Jewish prisoners. But his life was no better in the prisoner of war camp. He always used to tell us when we were eating that we should be thankful for what he had, because all he used to have to eat were potato peels. Now, of course, we understood that in a very abstract way, but obviously after I uncovered all of this, I understood exactly, what he was saying. I mean, the conditions there were horrific.
Now, do you remember when you went to Schönberg, was that a big town? Was it small?
I don't remember it being tremendously huge. I mean, I even have a picture of the flag or, the area in Schönberg where supposedly he was captured. I don't remember it being huge.
And your dad, being Jewish American, combat soldier, did they ever try to segregate him away, or was his religion ever put out there where the Germans learned of it? Because there was a concentration camp called Bulge, and that was more towards the Soviet side of Germany. But it was so remote that when American soldiers that were taken from the Battle of the Bulge ended up there, they were working in a weapons research center in the mountains. It was horrific work. And the people were almost surprised at looking at Americans being taken prisoner of war, and they had taken American Jewish prisoners of war, and they sent them there. And I think some of those men ended up at Buchenwald at the very end.
Based on my father's records, the only POW camp I know that he was at was Mühlberg.
It was Mühlberg itself, too.
That was the only camp that I know that he was at.
Now, did your dad talk about any of this stuff when you were younger?
Not a word. Not a word. I found, after he passed away, this big green metal casing and opened it up and found all of his original documentation, paperwork from the war. I found the Purple Heart. He never once mentioned that at all. Not once. Never knew that he received it, never knew that he requested it, did not know that he was trying to gain additional compensation for things he lost during the war, didn't know where he ended up being taken, didn't know that he walked 25 miles to the train station that was piling him into a cattle car to go there. I think it must have been so traumatic that he didn't want to talk about it. And
19 years old, 20 years old, going through this.
I mean, this was definitely, I would believe, a true case of PTSD, but at that point, I don't really know if that phrase had even been coined yet, and if it was, I don't think a lot of people talked about it. He didn't say anything ever.
Did your mom know anything about it?
That's something I'm always wondering. I can't imagine she didn't.
Because behind closed doors or on a long trip somewhere, or even sitting at the beach and something's coming back to your dad, he might lean over and say, "Did I ever tell you this?" You know, that sort of thing.
I can't imagine she didn't know something. We truly, my sister and I, did not know anything. He never talked about any of this.
Did you even know to ask? Did you even, like, as you were getting older and you realized, hey, you know, I'm living in the suburbs here, there's a lot of World War II, Korean vets, you know, you had the Levittown houses, right? Nassau County just explodes, right, in terms of all the towns and being everyone working in the city or whatever the case is. When did you realize that your dad was in the service?
I knew that he was in the service because he always used to talk about what he didn't have to eat. So I knew that. And we knew that his situation with his feet was a direct result of his service. But we just never knew or thought to ask these questions. Maybe it's because he just never brought it up. And I'm just not sure if we would have asked the question if he just would have shut it down, because it was so horrible and painful. I just think that he wanted to, you know, escape from it. I was told by his cousins that his mother, my grandmother, I believe, was in synagogue and somehow found out that my father was missing. I mean, all the events surrounding it were just so horrible. And I just don't think he wanted to talk about it. From what I understand, when his cousins finally saw him in the hospital after the war was over, they totally walked by him because he was so emaciated and sickly looking. They didn't even recognize him.
Yeah. It's not the kid that left Brooklyn.
No, I mean, he probably weighed next to nothing, and he was 6'2".
Big guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, later on, he definitely was, but he was probably, you know, next to nothing.
Did he play any sports? Did he have any jobs when he was growing up? Was he an active? I'm sure he was probably an active guy, right?
He never really talked about that either. I know one thing: he always loved the Yankees. That I will tell you. He was a big Yankee fan. That I know. Whether or not he was into sports when he was younger, I don't know. He might have been. I mean, he was.
I ask you because here you have this 6'2", and anytime you have somebody that's 6'2", they usually, you know, there's a presence to them.
Oh, definitely there was.
Right, and then you go at the end of the war. He's lucky to be alive. At some points, he's holding on because he's at a very dangerous rate for his weight and stuff like that, right? It's not good in terms of health wise, and people could definitely see the changes, right, in him, right, that the war had, right? That sort of thing.
Well, it's interesting because my father was a very big guy, as we knew him. And two things that always stuck out in my mind, everyone used to say he had the most powerful handshake, the most powerful handshake. The other thing that I always remember about him was whenever we were in synagogue, when you had an honor to be called up and lift the Torah, he was able to lift the Torah up and spread it so wide so that everybody could see it. So after all of this happened, somehow Hashem blessed him with the ability to do some of this. And he was always able to, it always amazed me, and it amazed everyone else the way that he was able to do this. Because if you ever lifted a Torah, I mean, it's quite heavy. And regardless of the size of it, he was able to do it every single time. So maybe he was involved with sports when he was younger, I really don't know. But after he came back from the war and regained his strength and got back into society, he was able to gain back a lot of the strength, thank God, that he lost.
Now, let me ask you this. Was he very religious, or
Yes.
or was he more religious after the war, after what he's been through?
I don't know how religious he was before. I will tell you that it is tradition that in Judaism, sometimes when you come back from something that is very horrific, you sometimes change your name. And he did change his Hebrew name after he came back from the war. When we grew up, he was very religious.
Wow.
He was very religious, always observed the commandments, Sabbath observant, prayed 3 times a day, was at synagogue all the time, and a very, very major part of his life.
You think he ever had a chance for when he goes into internment there, into being a prisoner of war? He had to do that in secrecy, I would imagine, right?
Definitely. I don't know how much of that he did or if he did it at all. I do have his prayer book, his Siddur from the armed forces, so he definitely had that. I don't really know what his involvement was Judaically when he was in the service, because certainly based on the fact that he threw off his dog tags, he obviously did not want any of the Germans to know that he was Jewish, understandably.
Yeah. I knew a man 26 years ago. There was a group, it was called the Nassau and Suffolk County chapter of prisoners of war. And they would meet in Northport at the VA. Okay. So here I'm this young guy, I'm up there. There was a couple prisoners of war that I had known. There was one man, Martin Andrews. He sounded like Bob Shepard, the Yankees PA dresser. He actually won Academy Awards for like filmmaking after the war. So these guys would go up, their wives would be in the background, putting the Entenmann's out, making the cake and the coffee and the tea and everything. And they said, we had this young guy here, Richard Acritelli, he would like to interview some of you. And, there was no cell phones, no nothing. Here's my address, here's my phone number. So I went to a bunch of prisoners of war in Nassau County one day. So this one man tells me, he goes, I recently went to the doctor, and the doctor said I had a split bone in my back. So here he is, a Jewish American prisoner of war. He's in the infantry. He gets taken during the Battle of the Bulge. So now they detain him, and they're interrogating him. And they take the rifle, itself, and they butt him right in the back. They hit him right in the square of his back. So now he falls down, he gets up, he goes, I'm getting up in defiance because I figure if I lay there, they might shoot me. So they go, well, you're fortunate that this is where we are in this war right now because we have places to send people like you, right? So now he goes, the doctor says to me, what did you do as a young man? I was an accountant. I did finance. But did you do something to your back? I was in the war. And that was it. And he was telling me the story, and his wife goes, I only knew maybe half of this. And it's like something what these guys held on to for the rest of their lives. Like your dad, 19, 20 years old, right? And he's got to function for the rest of his life. Family, home, bills. right? Things that come up.
It's amazing you should say that. That's exactly what happened to my father. He had a very, very bad back his entire life. And from what I remember him saying, he was hit in the back with a rifle butt when he was in the POW camp.
I wonder if that was him that I spoke to.
He had a very, very bad back. At times it was excruciating. I remember when we were younger, he was actually in the hospital for 2 weeks. They used to have people in traction where they...
Sure.
He was there for 2 weeks because of it.
Wow. So we're going to come back for a second episode. Maybe we'll get into some of the things that you have on your dad.
Sure.
We're going to get into this list. We're only maybe a quarter away down the list itself in terms of where Leah's father was situated during the war. Come back here for a second episode here on the Fog of War and Humanity on HMTV.
If you enjoyed exploring the information, history, and stories in today's conversation, be sure to check out our other podcasts here on HMTV. Please subscribe, share, and stay connected for more engaging conversations.
Humanity Matters.